Great. Hey everyone, this is ACDE number 191. Tim is out today, so I will be filling in for him. And yeah, I dropped the agenda in the chat here. It's issue 1080 on the PM repo. And let's get started. So first up, let's just jump into Pectra. And in particular, if there are any updates for DevNet 1, there's a link to a spec here with the latest and greatest EIPs. Yeah, would anyone like to give an update on their client's progress or anything like that?
I can maybe start with some overarching progress update. So we do have local testing done for 2 ELs and 3 CLs, and there's a bunch of happy case scenarios, and the clients seem to all agree on the happy case scenarios, which is great news. I've posted the Kurtosis config link to reproduce that. So in case someone wants to test if they're following along the chain, then you can have two clients be the producers and you can just check if your client is forking off based on the happy case tests. And the open question right now is, do we want to wait for more clients to be ready before we launch DevNet 1, or do we want to just launch DevNet 1 and retroactively add clients as and when they're ready?
Andrew?
Yeah, I can talk about Ergon's progress. We are still working on 7702. That's work in progress. But I think launching DevNet 1 now the timing might be a bit unfortunate because next week is FTC and a lot of people will be there. So yeah, I'm not sure whether we'll be able to work because of the ECC on DevNet 1.
Daniel?
I can give an update for Besso. So we were running the execution tests that were released last Friday. We are still fixing some bugs that we found with the tests. I think we will be a bit slowed down because part of the team now is on holidays because of July 4th. So I would guess we would be ready around mid to end of next week. But I think for us it would not matter so much if we start DevNet 1 already now or not. So if not, we would just join later.
Okay, thanks. Mehdi?
An update from Teku. We're ready for DevNet 1. We have all the reference tests passing, so yeah.
Okay, great. Mark?
Yeah, we are working on this happy path scenarios that Barry mentioned. We will update image before DevNet 1 because we have one bug in 7702. But we should be ready pretty soon with this fix as well.
Okay, cool. It's kind of sounding like to me we could wait another cycle of ACD to launch. I don't know if Barnabas or Perry feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, we're fine to wait. We still are missing a couple of happy case asserter tests, so we'll probably just be working on those in the meantime.
Okay, cool. But it does sound like soon we'll be ready with DevNet 1, which is super cool. Anything else on DevNet 1 there for Pectra? There was a call out on the agenda for 7702, so we'll move to that next, unless there's anything else more broadly with Pectra that anyone would like to discuss. Okay, so let's move to 7702. So I think Tim had this on the agenda just to ask for general updates. I think there were still some open questions around the EIP that would kind of be blocking its inclusion in Pectra. That being said, I think we have some updates on those open questions. Maybe like client, if you'd like to call out this PR that you had linked.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, I just posted the link to this PR in the chat. Basically, this is something that we've talked about offline and in the last breakout call. People were mostly supportive of this change, both on the wallet side and the client side. The TLDR, for those who haven't had a chance to review, we're essentially changing 7702 to be less of a ephemeral deployment of contract and more of a deploying a contract more permanently into the EOA's code. And it allows the EOA to continue operating as an EOA because the code that's deployed in their account isn't exactly the code which the user wants to delegate to. It's a designator that has a prefix and then an address to the code which the user would like to delegate to. So that sort of gives us the ability to see that that EOA is a special type of account that can both originate transactions and act as a contract. This lets us get around the restriction in 3607, I think, where we banned EOAs with code from originating transactions. It also helps us get around a fundamental problem that we've had since 3074, which is dealing with these permanent authorizations and replay protection and authorizations. The fundamental problem there was that to get the functionality which we felt was really important, which was things like signing one message and then reusing the authorization over and over again, required us not having replay protection functionality in the authorization. This circumvents that by, instead of the permanency of the authorization coming from the message, it's being stored in a place in the account. And that feels like the ideal path. So now not only do the authorizations get to have the nonce and get to be only single use, but potentially other tools like other wallets that are interested in acting as the EOA, because maybe the user has put their private key or their mnemonic into multiple wallets, they can then just look on the chain and see if the account has already delegated to a specific piece of code. So I think that this is addressing most of the concerns that were outstanding. If I'm missing something, someone please chime in. But I'm curious how people feel about this, and if people feel that it would be okay to merge this and move towards this for devnet too.
Ansgar?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly expand on what Matt just said, because on the breakout call, we discussed with at least the people present there, and general feeling there was that indeed this PR would be a really good candidate for basically devnet 2. With the one caveat just being that just everyone should be aware, should understand this as, like, given that 7702 is so new, we're still iterating towards the final spec. Like, I don't think it's very likely that this PR will get us quite to a final spec yet for Pectra. So smaller changes might still be coming. We already discussed potential ones. It's just that we all agree that it's likely that basically this PR gets us significantly closer. So it seems like a better target for a devnet 2 than the old spec. But just for people's expectation, that there will be future small changes in all likelihood to the IP.
Okay. There was a question in the chat. It looks like the chat is there. Daniel?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because we said that we are going to move devnet maybe 1 or 2 weeks in the future. Does it make sense that we implement directly the latest version of 7702, so the one that is proposed right now, or should we still go with the original one?
I would say to keep it as is, just because this latest PR is not merged yet, and there could be some last minute feedback. Let me go see what was in here. So yeah, the devnet one specs just link directly to the EIP, so I would just target that as is, unless anyone else would
Okay.
like to argue for something differently right now.
I mean, I feel like we should have devnet 1 ASAP, but I don't think we should change devnet 1 necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So
I
let's
think
keep it
like
as,
most clients have already implemented everything more or less, so it's not like clients haven't implemented 7702 at all.
right. Okay.
Ethereum, yes, has actually implemented it, so we have it.
Great.
So is there any feedback on including this in devnet 2? Like, it seems like we're talking a bit about timing, but it feels that most people are generally positive on accepting this for devnet 2, whenever that ends up being.
Yeah, I would lean towards just getting it merged first, and then we can discuss scheduling, but it
I mean, it's
seems
not
okay
merged because
today.
we're waiting to include it in devnet 2.
Okay.
Like, I can merge it right now. All right, unless someone feels strongly or says something in the next 6 to 12 hours, I'll merge it at the end of today, and we should plan on doing that for devnet 2.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And there doesn't seem to be any negative feedback, so let's move ahead with that plan.
Consider for a moment that most Americans out are on vacation. You should give a couple days for people to reply in chat before proceeding. But I think a couple days
I
is
mean,
fair.
they've had a week and a half.
True, but you're actually pulling the trigger here. A couple days would be nice.
Yeah, I don't think we discussed this on the last ACD, so, process-wise, it would make sense to give people some time, a reasonable amount of time after, say, announcing on the call. But generally, I think moving towards DevNet 2 makes a lot of sense. Cool. So I think that was it on Pectra. Oh, maybe this teases up the next thing, actually. But yeah, is there anything on 7702? Otherwise, we will go to the next EIP, 7212, which I think is the R1 curve.
I think the last thing on 7702 is that if we're moving towards changing this spec for devnet 2, I'm curious what people think about our testing strategy for 7702 and devnet 1. Like, we do have some tests, but I'm not sure if we're planning to build out more or if people are comfortable sort of leaving the testing where it is for devnet 1 on 7702.
Can we just test common subsets? Like whatever would apply to DevNet 1 and also DevNet 2, we could just focus on for DevNet 1.
I don't think that there's as much common subsets. Like, there is still a transaction type. We are still setting these authorizations. I'm just not really sure like what test would work in both cases.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, if it's going to change and kind of be breaking in that way, I would probably say just to test, like whatever test we have now, we'll use for devnet 1, and then otherwise we'll focus on devnet 2 for devnet 2. Okay. Thank you for that. Everyone, please take a look at the PR for 7702. Next, we had a topic for EIP 7212. So this is adding a precompile for the SegP256R1 curve. And I think there's a few questions here. Let's see, is Andrew on the call? You had the comment. It looks like you are. Yeah. Would you like to give us a little context here?
Yeah, I think there was a discussion on Discord, and that EPO was CFI'd, and it's also used on Polygon already. Because it's CFI'd, basically, we need to decide sooner rather than later whether we deliver it in Pectra or not. And if we do, like, do we actually take what's already on Polygon, or do we implement a slightly different version of it using, because on Polygon, say the precompile address is like 256 or something. So it's not, it's in the range reserved for L2s, as far as I understand. Yeah, and the question is whether we keep that or modify it somehow for Ethereum.
Right. Is that the only difference between the RIP and the EAP? Is just it's at a different precompile address?
I think somebody had a comment that the return value is unorthodox, like it's not aligned with what the other precompiles do, but I don't remember who that was.
Okay. Yeah, how do clients feel? This would pretty much be a purely EL change. So how do any EL clients feel about this EIP? Daniel?
Yeah, so for Pesto, we are definitely in favor of including it. I mean, it's in the end, every mobile phone is supporting this EC curve. So it's like most user already have like a built-in hardware wallet. So for us, it definitely makes sense to allow them to use that instead of a traditional one. So I think for UX, it would be great to have it.
Mm-hmm. What client?
I think on Geth we're generally pretty positive. Like adding the R1 curve is pretty easy since we already have the K1 curve. I think in general there's just still questions like why add another cryptographic precompile? Is this the right cryptographic precompile to add? You know, I think we would feel a little bit better if there was more work towards something to allow people to write their own efficient cryptography in EVM. That's something that hasn't seen a lot of progress in the last year or two. And there's still questions about like what address to use. We sort of carved out an address space for rollups, and now we need to figure out, are we going to use the rollup address space for precompiles on mainnet, or are we going to deploy it at the regular address? And there's reasons to do both.
Mark?
We are in favor of including the CIP.
Great. Dano?
So to address the why not do it generally in the EVM, there's a proposal called EVM Max, and that's not shipping until at least Amsterdam. So if we want the R curve anything sooner than a year and a half to 2 years to 3 years out, we just need to ship it as a precompile. So that's why I support it, even though I think the correct solution is to move it all to the EVM. It's not going to ship in a reasonable time frame.
Right, but even if it's not going to ship in a reasonable time frame, is the R1 curve the right curve to be shipping? Like some people are saying that the R1 curve is already starting to be replaced with Edwards curve.
There's broad support for the R curve in a lot of places like Passkey from Google. So I'm satisfied. There's always going to be new curves. And when Edwards curve is ready, I mean, there's been a proposal for an Edwards precompile, but we could probably do an EVM1 max. It'll probably be relevant then when max is ready.
Yeah, personally, I think there's enough value around this curve, given its broad deployment in all these different contexts, that it wouldn't quite make sense to block on something like EVM max. Although generally there is value in EVM max. But yeah, it's unclear what those timelines will look like. It looks like the EAP has the precompile address at, the typical one, meaning like the next lowest address free on Ethereum in the EVM. And that does sound like something we need to resolve if we want to keep that or mirror what is used, say, on L2s. There was a comment in the chat to please keep the same address in both places. Matt or Likeline, do you have something else to say? Or was your hand up from
Yeah, I
an
mean,
earlier comment?
separately from the specific concerns about R1, I get it's not a difficult thing to implement, but Pectra is already mega. And at some point, we need to ship Pectra and stop adding things. And it feels like we're already way past that point. So I feel a little bit weird that we're trying to add things when we're like talking about when to ship the second devnet of this fork. Again, it's not like a big feature, but eventually we have to just stop and ship. And there's a lot of other things that we want to do that aren't in the hard fork that aren't really being encoded, like doing history expiry, maybe improving the situation with the public mempool for blobs that we just have no bandwidth to do because we are spending a lot of time figuring these forks out. So R1 is kind of a little bit of a different thing since it is very easy, but generally I would prefer to reduce the scope of Pectra and focus on some of this other stuff, including like not accepting R1.
Ansgar?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly clarify with the address. So in general, because this is the very first time that we shipped in a precompile as an RIP, there was a little bit of confusion on the procedural parts. So specifically because this was first created as an EIP, right now we just copied it over as an RIP, so the IP has the exact same number. Normally, we basically don't want like this should be one EIP address space, EIP IP address space. So basically the idea was to just delete the EIP and then create one with a new number if we ever want to bring it to mainnet. We just never ended up doing this, but this now means that we're in this weird position where basically the EIP that still exists at the same number is now in an outdated version. So if you go to the RIP with the same number, 7212, it actually, for example, is now at a different address because that's the address where it was actually shipped on layer 2s, which is the first available address in the layer 2 specific address space that we reserved a couple months ago, decided to reserve for layer 2 use a couple months ago on Orcadevs. So yeah, I think we should basically just ideally, if we decide to add this to Pectra, we should use it as an opportunity to really make general decisions around how we want to handle these layer 2 first features in the future. If we decide to make any spec changes to the IP whatsoever, so for example, there have been some concerns about the return value of the precompile, that it doesn't give a return value instead of giving a 0 return value in terms of in the case of a verification failure. So for example, if we wanted to make that change, then we should definitely ship it at a different address because it would deviate from the layer 2 version. If we want to ship it completely unchanged, I think we should make a general decision whether we want to always, in these cases, retain the layer 2 specific address or ship it at the layer 1 specific address. And then also in that connection should make a final choice on how we handle this EIP situation. I think my preference would be to just completely delete the EIP because it's outdated anyway and has the weird numbering collision, and then create a new EIP that at a new higher number, whatever the first available is today, and just copy over the spec but yeah, so just to flag that there are these open questions that we would have to solve.
Right. Adrian? Oh, looks like maybe disconnected. iPhone, whoever that is.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry. I wanted to give a user's perspective here. For the record, I work at OpenZeppelin, and we just merged a library that supports the verification and the recovery of R1 signatures. The demand for that comes from the account abstraction world, where people want to be able to use 4237 and other account abstraction systems using smartphone as hardware wallet, basically. And the way we implemented it is we have a Solidity implementation, and we also have a version that checks the precompile from RIP 7212. The Solidity implementation is way more expensive, and if people could avoid spending that cost, that would be better. So for our implementation, tries to go to the precompile, and if that is not successful, then we go on to the Solidity implementation. We have big concern about this feature being available on multiple chain at different addresses in terms of precompile, because we think that for user, it's better to not have to write code specifically depending on which target chain you are targeting and changing the precompile address depending on what you're targeting. It should be better to have one single version that works on as many chains as possible. And unless this code starts checking multiple precompile one after the other before then falling back to Solidity implementation, it would just be better for all the user if there was one address that the library could go to. I understand that from a client perspective, they may feel differently, but from a user's perspective, people that are going to write code that uses precompile, that functionality is better if all chain provide it in a similar way.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with that. I think maybe the only argument I could see against it, which isn't maybe not the best argument for R1 because it's so simple, but there is a possibility that we get into a world where we need to change the precompile, and if we have the rollups precompile that they've decided upon, and on mainnet we end up needing to change it, whether it's in the fork that we originally ship it or in a later fork, now we have maybe even a worse problem, which is the same address being used for two different precompiles.
Yeah, iPhone, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the readiness of R1 and the client libraries.
I think most. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Joachim.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Like, I've just been searching, but we do not have it implemented. And it also does not seem that there's a quick JavaScript binding. So I'm not really sure how long this will take, but that's just cycling.
Marius.
For us, it's part of the Go standard library. So the implementation is really easy. Just add the guy's costs, and that's it. And we also have a PR for it already from someone who proposed it for the RIPs. In general, I'm in favor of it. It's just, yeah. I think there's an argument to be had that we like. It's nice that the rollups did this first, and so I don't know if we actually need it that much on mainnet. No one is really doing these kind of things on mainnet anymore, using like smart contract wallets on mainnet, and it's not because it's impossible or anything, just because it's too expensive anyway. So I don't think that adding this precompile will really change that. At least in my opinion, I think it's great that we have this on rollups and people can use it on rollups. It feels again like one of these things where we I don't know. In my view, we should focus on getting functionality and stuff onto rollups and focus L1 on blob scalability and these kind of things, and not focus too much of the like EVM feature set on L1. But I would be fine either way.
Okay. Richard? Richard, you have your hand up, but you're not unmuting.
Ah, damn it. Sorry.
There you go.
Forgot to unmute. The typical unmute for. I wanted to say, from the standpoint of Safe, right? Like, since we are one of these smart contract wallet projects, that we would like to do stuff like this on L1, right? Like, because at least currently, a lot of liquidity, a lot of teams are still on L1. They are still there. And this is where, at least in the current state, L1 is not perceived as this, we want to move away from L1. If we as an ecosystem agree on this, I think this would be a little bit of a mindset shift, which I'm not generally against, but it's at least not the agreement of everybody in the ecosystem. We had this discussion actually in one of the AA breakout rooms where it was not that clear that everybody agrees to, yes, let's move away from L1, where L1 is just basically this blob space layer, like this roll-up chain, right? Like, and this is where, unless we agree to this, there is still a lot of values where a lot of teams are still on L1, and a lot of teams do prefer also to have better UX, and R1 will just enable this, just as a general context there.
Okay, thanks. So Ansgar has a proposal to move forward on this point. It sounds like there's like a few things we'd want to do. So then I would suggest doing those things and deferring the actual inclusion decision to the next ACDE. Just to echo some other comments in the chat, because I have the same view, like Pectra is already very, very big, and we should really be deliberate about including more at this point. Okay. Let's move on then. So, actually, Andrew had one other comment here. Let's just knock this out quickly. The question was if we can sunset Goerli. So, I'm not sure. He had the question if we had like a blog announcement or something like this. I don't know if Tim was planning to do anything there in terms of following up, but generally my understanding is that clients already have started to deprecate Goerli support. So yeah, should be fine to drop from your client, and we will wave goodbye.
And click is not used anywhere, like for Hive testing or anything like that. Because Goerli uses click, and with Goerli gone, we can potentially remove click as well.
Yeah, I think most of the testing is. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, we already started removing click from the Geth code base. So
Okay, no more Goerli, no more click. Great. So then the next agenda item was a proposal to change the pre-deploys. We have these like system contracts for various functionality. In this case, that goes from when we want to move information from the EL into the CL, there's two EIPs that use this type of functionality in Pectra 7002 and 7251. Let's see. I don't know if PK is on the call. Yeah. Would you like to give us a summary of your proposal?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. As said, I would like to suggest a small change to these both contracts because right now, both of these contracts do not trigger any event on successful invocation. And the problem is, while this is technically not required for the new functionality to transfer this to proceed the information, it makes it really hard for external toolings like explorers to track back the origin of these execution layer triggered operations. So if something appears on consensus layer, we would like to trace back where this operation comes from. So which transaction hash basically triggered that operation. And for that, it would be really helpful if both contracts could trigger an event that the explorers or external toolings can simply follow on. So yeah, that's basically the request there.
Thanks. Let's see. Are any of the authors of those contracts on the call? Maybe they could chime in.
Yeah, I think we have discussed this before, and this change makes sense, and it should not result in a big spike of in gas cost for the smart contract call. So makes sense to do, and I've been discussed this with Light Client previously and planning to have this change. One of the concerns might be that they will produce logs for just more chain data, historical chain data, but it should not be a problem soon. And it will be expired.
But it would also align it a bit with the deposit contract because we have the log there, and we are basically introducing new operations that are triggered on execution layer without that log event. So yeah, it aligns it a bit to both contracts.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I can.
so I think we should just work on it if there is no other opinion and opposition to it.
The only thing I would ask is just like, again, if we keep changing Pectra will never ship. So there's some argument for leaving it as is just because it's not critical and invariably it will delay other things. Yeah, I do think this is like a pretty small change in scope, so it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, fortunately, this is handled by the smart contract itself, so we just need to modify smart contracts and then deploy new code to the next devnet. So it should be quite opaque to client development process.
Right.
The only one thing probably is, oh no, it's going to be a regular call and client will handle those log messages as usual, log events, sorry.
Okay, so then we need to update the pre-deploy implementations, but generally sounds like we're all in alignment here. Cool. So next up on the agenda, we have EIP 158 deactivation. I think Guillaume has an EIP, or at least, let's see, this might just be a PR to 158. Yep. Yeah. Would you like to give us an overview?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, a couple comments before because people started giving me feedback. So as it turns out, it's referred to as 158 inside the guest code, but it's actually EIP 161. So thanks for catching that. And yeah, as a quick reminder, we already had the conversation about it on LACD a couple months back. One of the things that was being said is I should create an EIP to support this, so I did. It's EIP 7733, and it's about deactivating EIP 158/161. So it's actually not the whole EIP that needs to be deactivated. It's only the deletion of an account if it's code hash. Well, if it's the empty code hash, if the balance is 0 and if the nonce is 0. That is impossible to do in Verkle, simply because an EOA could have some storage slots, and in Verkle you cannot figure out where an account slots are. So that needs to go. It's the same reason why self-destruct was removed or nerfed. We have the same problem that can happen in the context with 7702, in which an account has funds, so a non-zero balance. An EOA has a non-zero balance, so it has an empty code hash, and it's got an empty nonce. So it's just the result of a transfer. Then with 7702, someone can call into this account, execute some code, and the code transfers all the funds to a different account, in which case the EIP 161, I have to get used to it, the EIP 161 rules say you have to delete the account, which is not possible because, like I said, and just to clarify, to make sure it's clear, if you execute some code, you could potentially create some storage slots. So there will be potentially state, and you will not be able to find it. So yeah, the simplest way would be either to set the nonce of that account to 1 or to deactivate EIP 161. The proposal is about deactivating EIP 161. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, there's one extra remark about it. It's that why am I talking about it in the context of Prague? We already had a conversation about it, and initially I thought, well, we probably don't need it for Prague, but there's one reason to include it in Prague is, and that is if people want to give some pushback against the overlay method in the future. That means you will be able, you will have to replay, like to do the conversions at a given block height, and replay blocks in what I call a counterfactual history until that replay chain becomes the official chain. If during that period between the conversion and the replay and the fork, one of those things happen, one account gets deleted, that means you do have the existence of a deletion happening in Verkle mode. That is going to be that's a potential bug. That's potentially breaking the conversion, and so I think it's safer to deactivate it at the fork before if we want to give some pushback on the overlay method. I am a proponent of the overlay method, so personally I don't care, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that if you don't include this EIP in Prague, you're effectively canceling this, like removing this possibility. Yep, that's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, why client?
I was just going to say, this isn't really a problem with 7702 after the spec change. So I think we should focus on this for its merits of Verkle, since it's not related to 7702 now.
Okay, so I'm not aware of the change in the spec, but that means this could no longer happen.
Yes.
And what was the fix for my personal edification?
Now with the new PR for 7702, the auth message is consumed by updating the account's nonce. So the auth message is
Okay,
only
perfect.
valid for the nonce it's signed, and then once it's consumed, account nonce bumped. So you can't have a zero nonce account with code.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that works.
I think in general we can just accept this ERP, right? Because currently this whole situation of deleting these accounts is not really like empty accounts with storage. That's not really possible anymore, right?
It's not currently possible, yes. And in fact, come to think of it, if the 7702 EIP no longer leaves the nonce as 0, then there's no problem to begin with. So we can even withdraw the EIP altogether, which is fine by me.
Okay, so then we do not need 7733.
Nope.
Okay, great. Okay, that was easy. That was it on the agenda for today. Is there anything else we would like to discuss? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up a bit early today. Otis?
I just wanted to shield that we have a breakout room tomorrow for 7732. This is the number 4, and the agenda is kind of packed. So if you're working on EPBS, come tomorrow. And if you're not, take a look at 7732 that is already open, and the CL repo is an only CL EIP, and the repo has the PR.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I dropped the issue for the breakout call in the chat. It's 1083. If you are interested, please attend. My client has a question. Did Guillaume have more to discuss on system contracts?
Yeah, good question. Not really. I mean, maybe just announce that we reached an agreement. So yeah, there is an update to the EIP. I made an update PR to the EIP to say in Prague everything behaves like everything in 2935 behaves exactly like 4788. And then there's another EIP to talk about how things change, but once Verkle is activated. So that is a bridge that we have to cross when we get there. Yeah, no need to hold Prague for this.
Okay, and there's a little more discussion in the chat. Are we 100% certain there are no mainnet accounts which are empty but which have storage? I'm not sure if that is going to impact 7733.
So there's actually a few that were created before EIP 161. But we agreed on some call some time ago that during the conversion, those accounts will be deleted. So yes, then we will be sure, unless a new mechanism gets introduced, of course, that will be able to create those new accounts. My understanding is that no, we cannot create new empty accounts at this time or in Prague.
Okay. Like client, do you have some things you'd like to bring up around Pectra scoping?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we go through phases of being heads down, focused on forks, focused on devnets, but there are these things that don't have the strict like devnet deadlines, that don't have the strict hard fork deadlines, which are important, and we aren't discussing them that much. And I'm just like hoping to maybe get some more clarity from other client teams about where these things stack up in our priority list. I think history expiry is something that is super important, and we talked about it at the interop, and it felt like we wanted to move forward with it, and I haven't really seen a lot of work or thoughts or progress on that since then. So do we need to like start implementing Portal? Like, what's the next step here? Should we have a call where we have updates about what we're doing and try to do some dev nets? Like, I really don't know. And another thing that I think is not being talked about really at all that is important is that if we're going to be doing peer DOS and increasing the blob count in Pectra or some fork soon after, then we need to have a better idea of how to deal with blobs in the public transaction pool, because we don't want to just 2 or 3x the total blob count and do nothing for the public mempool, because then the public mempool will eat away all the bandwidth improvements that we got from PeerDOS. So these are things that I think we need to, yeah, and Marius is right, we also need to revamp some things if 7702 goes in as it is. So there's a lot of stuff that we need to be working on, and we're just talking about the like surface level EIPs going into Pectra. And so it would be good to hear when people want to start talking about these other things and when we might expect some of these things to be updated. I see everyone is very excited to talk about these topics.
So late client, we are experimenting with Portal network integration. We have a developer working on it at the moment, but we'll see how it goes. It's like experimental research right now.
Okay.
And about ERA exports, import, we are working on it as well. So generally, we are working on history expiry.
Sweet. How can we like surface more of the work? How can we, I feel like this is an important priority, and I think most other people agree it's an important priority, but I don't think that it's receiving the same attention, at least on this call, as if it were going into a hard fork. What's a better way to make sure that the progress is being surfaced and that the progress is like sort of being forced? Like, for better or worse, we do have a bit of a call-driven development cycle, and maybe that just means that we need to talk about our progress on history expiry every all core devs. I'm not sure if people have other suggestions.
I think my biggest problem was that we don't have the scope of Pectra tied down, and since we don't have this, we cannot really focus on other things because we're still working on stuff that might go into Pectra or might not, and maybe it would be nice to say we stop now, we go with the spec that we have right now, we ship it on devnet 1, 2, 3, whatever, and this gives us a bit of breathing room to work on other stuff as well. Once the stuff is on the devnets, it's not that much time anymore that we have to spend on it.
Otis?
Yeah, so regarding blob transaction propagating, I have a general comment, which goes a little bit beyond ACD, but I think it's probably a mistake to try to start looking into changes to the protocol without having all the information at hand. I sat down at a war room on a rollup of a major rollup, and I saw how the gas price was spiking, even though the base fee was still at one way. And this happens when you have a series of builders, for example, that are averaging 3 blocks per block, and home stakers that are actually committing the 6 blocks transactions. And we have data for that. We have data that home stakers are sending more blobs than builders. This breaks the 1559 market that we have for the gas data price. So if we don't have really good data onto how this market is working, how the transactions are propagating, and even how the miners are calculating the tips, because we see transactions with lower tips that are getting included before transactions with higher tips, then it's very hard to try to think that we're going to solve this here at the protocol level. We probably need to have more data on how the market is actually working today.
Mark, did you have a comment?
I wanted to just ask my client, did you guys start working on something related to blob takes pool for peer-DARs or not yet? We are not working on that right now, but we will start if you are exploring.
Yeah, we haven't started any development of anything. I've basically just been having some conversations mostly with Piper, since he has looked into this idea of propagating transaction within the Portal network. And like, as you know, in the Portal network, you have very light nodes who only have a very specific view of the network. And so he's sort of come up with an idea of having basically an overlay that says where to propagate certain transactions to. And that feels like the right path, at least for blob transactions, where you sort of, based on your node ID, you know where, what what accounts transactions you're going to need to keep track of. And I don't see necessarily a blocker for it. I think it's something that we just have to implement and see if it works okay. But I just don't really know like when to do it, because we have a pretty high cadence of Pectra devnets and adding things, and it would be good if we had a way to make room to work on this stuff that isn't specifically fork related. That needs to be done. And that's kind of what I'm like trying to figure out, is like, what is that thing? Because it's really nice with the EAPs, because we got the devnets, the EAP numbers, the testing team makes some tests, and then we can just run it in kurtosis, or we can run it on the devnet. And that's like forcing us forward. But a lot of this other stuff, these are just ideas, and we just keep saying this is important, but we don't make a lot of progress on them because there isn't the forcing function.
So is the answer more breakouts?
I mean, I don't think it's just in more breakouts. Like, I think that we need to have something at the all core devs level. Like, I think we need to be sharing updates on how things are progressing. Yeah, probably we need more breakouts to discuss and move things forward. But I also feel like, I mean, it needs to basically be a requirement. It needs to be something that is part of the devnets. Like, clients are implementing the old version of 7702 because it's in the devnet 1 spec. And if we didn't have these things, if it was just more free flow, like, we probably wouldn't have started implementing 7702, and we would just like start looking at this new version. And yeah, there's a little bit of extra work that's done there, but it is forcing us to like move things forward, and it is forcing people to get the context that they need to like make more informed decisions. I think right now everybody is saying these all sound great, but we don't have enough context to make like really good decisions and have technical debates, whether it's in a breakout here or ETH Magicians. And so we need to like be building that up. So I kind of feel like if we really truly want to make progress on this stuff, then we need to start saying like, okay, here's a devnet target that's going to have this functionality. Let's start working on some tests to make sure that that functionality is working, and not move forward until those things happen. And I think part of it is, even if we do have those things, there's just like a finite number of people and time to do this stuff, and we're like pretty saturated with Pectra. So I would like to maybe talk about either, if not capping Pectra, then even reducing the scope of Pectra a bit from what it currently is. Because at this rate, Pectra will not ship this year, and if it doesn't ship this year, then it will ship sometime next year, probably without these things like history expiry and improved blob transaction propagation. So then that stuff will only start bubbling up like mid to late next year.
Yeah, iPhone.
Yeah, so I agree, but with history expiry, if it's not a hard fork, it doesn't seem like there is any pressure to get it done.
I mean, yeah, with history expiry, like it is an ETH wire upgrade, so it feels like something that we should be doing in a hard fork. Like, no, we can do it without a hard fork, but because we are going to bump the ETH wire for the requests anyways, we might as well bundle these things together. Has been my opinion, and part of it is like me not pushing forward these things and like updating these specs and making them happen. But like again, part of the reason is because there's been a lot of work on Pectra instead.
Okay, yeah, I think given that you said that, it probably would make sense to have another breakout room, because I thought it would just be sort of a add-on to the nodes. At least that's one of the ideas that has been going about. So it wouldn't actually affect anything to do with the normal P2P network.
Is anybody interested in capping the scope for Pectra or reducing the scope, or up only?
Well, let's not do up only.
I am interested in that.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think if we start revisiting our decisions like for no good reason, that's a bad practice. So we've been discussing the scope of Pectra quite a lot, and I don't think it's a good thing to regurgitate the same discussions again and again. I am fine with not increasing the scope of Pectra, but I'm totally not fine with kind of revisiting and reducing it for no good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. If we don't need a fork for EIP 4.4, why not just let people implement? Like, what's preventing us from letting just clients implement it on their own time? Like, some clients might be able to have it right off the bat, and others will take years, but that's fine. Is there something blocking us from doing?
Well, I think we need to have a ETH wire protocol that says I'm not going to have that historical data, because if we were to just ship it in the current ETH wire protocol, you're going to have a very heterogeneous set of nodes where some nodes have the history and some nodes don't. But there's not an identifier in the handshake that sort of says, do I have the history or not? And there's been proposals about like having an identifier that says how much history I have. I would prefer to just say whether or not you have the like 1 year of history as like this binary thing. But I think that we have to have some way of saying that. So, it doesn't have to go into a hard fork, but like, yeah, if some node, if Geth implements it and no one else does, then it's going to be harder for those nodes that are still full syncing the history to go and find that history, because, there will be less nodes on the network to serve it to them.
Wait, I thought that if you didn't have the history, you just proxy to the portal network, so nothing really changes.
I mean, you can't really proxy to the portal network for network queries, because the portal network isn't really designed for these range queries that the P2P would request.
Right.
It's more for if the RPC receives a request for like one-off blocks, then it could go and get that one-off block. But if the node requests for like 10,000 headers, you're not going to want to download 10,000 headers from Portal.
Marius?
Yes, this is unrelated to the discussion that Guillaume and Matt just had, but related to the discussion that we were having in the chat around the blob transaction. One thing we noticed basically today is that there are some issues around the order in which we propagate blob transactions. So what we need to do is we need to propagate the blob like if blob transactions arrive at our node in a wrong order, we might actually throw some of them away. And that leads to issues if a rollup sends multiple blob transactions. We operated under the assumption that rollups don't need to send multiple blob transactions per block. But apparently some of them are still doing it. If it's might be out of bugs or out of necessity. Anyway, we need to make sure that we are sending and receiving blob transactions in the same order, in nonce-ordered order, so that we don't throw them away in the blob transaction pool. Just an FYI to and we are not doing that in Geth. There's a bug right now where we are not receiving them in order, and so we might actually throw some of them away. So yeah, this is something that we're going to fix. And it would be good if other clients also took note of this and check their blob pool implementations to make sure that they are also only sending blob transactions and receiving blob transactions in nonce order. And this will make block propagation quite a bit less painful because you don't need to resend block transactions all the time.
Okay, so there's a client issue to be aware of, but then also blob users should be careful about how they send the transactions as well.
Yes, they should be aware that if they are sending multiple transactions, that these transactions might arrive at other nodes in the wrong order, and so some of them might be thrown away because we only allow nonce-ordered transactions and not and ungapped transactions in the block pool, so that we only allow transactions that have no nonce gap in the block pool. Not in the normal transaction pool, it's fine, but in the block pool, it's not.
Right. I mean, I guess how would you know as a rollup, or like, you know, let's say I'm making a blob, like I might not necessarily know that there's a nonce gap somewhere else, right?
You should know it because you know which nonce to put into your blob transaction. So you know that there was a nonce gap to the current state that you have.
Okay, but that kind of implies I need to either only make one transaction at a time. Like I essentially have to wait for, if I make a transaction, I have to wait for it to be included, right? I can't make like 3, 4, 5.
You can actually make multiple transactions, just that, so what people kind of tended to do is basically wait a couple 100 milliseconds between sending them out so that the previous one has time to propagate. In the case of blob transactions, it might take a bit more. It's definitely something that we will attempt to fix in Geth, but it's still, so the problem is that transaction announcement protocol is very dumb. It just says that, hey, here's a hash and you do whatever you want with it. So what we can do in Geth, we can make sure that we download announced hashes in the order that we have received those announcements, but we have absolutely no idea what those hashes belong to. So we don't know what order we should download. If we have, I don't know, 3,000 hashes, which one of them are, I mean, okay, we know which one of them are blob transactions because we also include that, but we don't have the nonces, we don't have the accounts. So we can't actually prioritize or sort downloading the blob transactions in order. So even if we take care to do a better job in keeping the announcement orders that we see the hashes in, there's still no guarantee if some other client announces them in a bit YOLO-y way. So Geth does take care not to announce them gapped or out of order, but we can't really rely on other clients doing the same thing. So there can always be some weirdness there. But
Right.
that's a whole new can of worms as to what could be done with the whole transaction propagation to make it more stable. So.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if you could just include the nonce along with the transaction announcement.
I mean, the thing is, you need to include the nonce, and then you need to include the account. But the problem is that you cannot really verify it until you download it. So, I mean, it's still, somebody can still feed. Basically, I can just watch what kind of accounts are announced on the network and just try to clash with fake nonces and fake addresses. So it's kind of hard to make anything that's really robust.
Yeah, that makes sense. Otis, did you have your hand up from earlier, or was that resolved?
Just wanted to mention that batch posting on a rollup is quite complicated, and you change tactics on the run as other rollups also are changing their tactics. If you have if you're posting batches at 6 blobs per transaction, and you see that none of your batches are being posted because some rollup is posting and paying more than posting only 1 blob, and then the builder cannot include a transaction with 6 blobs because they already have that 1 blob there. Then rollups start like resending batches with less blobs. So I'm not saying that Geth should do this or do that, but definitely there aren't that many users of blob transactions today. And those are the guys that are being affected, and rollups are being forced to try to talk to the relays to see how are they going to get their transactions to the builder, because the mempool, the public mempool, is not getting those transactions to the builder. So this conversation should be happening with the rollups and not among ourselves only. I feel like there's this thing that Geth is doing something to protect the mempool, and I understand. I mean, there's a DOS attack there, but then on the other side, there's the users. There aren't that many users, and they have their own problems and they try to adapt to whatever Geth decides that the mempool should be. And this conversation should be happening with them.
Yeah, here's fair. I think we would be curious to know how rollups operate. I mean, how they send their transactions and what they would like supported and not supported. So I think that's a perfectly valid. We're open to that. But again, I don't think it's fair to say that Geth needs to do this. I think basically all ELs needs to be aware of these and do it properly.
I also don't necessarily agree that we need to talk to the rollups. I think it's kind of, we are not providing the service that we are claiming, and so we need to fix it. It's not really, yeah, like we should do something about it, and we are going to do something about it. But I just wanted to mention that there's some issues there.
Yeah, for sure. So this is something that affects the normal transaction pool too in a bit. So it's an issue. We're going to fix it, but I'm not entirely sure that it's going to make too big of a difference. But we can definitely see.
Oscar had a nice comment in the chat that essentially rollup should think about how many blobs they put per transaction. If you have a transaction with 6 blobs, it becomes this like very bulky thing to pack in alongside other blob transactions. And if you go
There's
down
a lot of
this,
literature to this. This is not something that rollups have been thinking about this way before we shipped 4844. They have a lot of literature as to what is the optimum strategy, and also like depending if there's 2-3 players posting at the time, rollups know much more than we know about how to post batches. The thing is that there's also this external constraint, which is how the public mempool actually acts, and that breaks the assumptions of that body of literature. But I would say that the rollups, they know much more of what are the better strategies for batch posting than what we know.
maybe. I mean, if I make a 6 blob transaction and then there's some like mempool issue that means I don't see it in time, you know, like another rollups transaction, then I just wouldn't know, right? And I think if you take this to the limit, like you should actually only put 1 blob per transaction because that's the most flexible way to pack.
So another thing that I think people need to be aware of is that 6 blobs means 1 megabyte of data. What is it? 1 megabyte? Maybe a little less. But essentially that's a huge latency to propagate over the entire network. So yeah, it's kind of we're entering in this weird territory, and there's also this talk that people would like to even further increase the capacity of block transactions and blocks. But yeah, I mean, it's probably not really super healthy to create transactions that are that heavy because they just strain everything through the entire pipeline, and then weird things start happening.
So your suggestion would be to increase the maximum number of blobs in a block while keeping the limit of blobs per transaction the same or something like this?
No, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that it's another dimension that everybody needs to be aware of, that latency starts to play a role here.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting this now, that we should think about whether we want to limit the number of blobs per transaction with a different limit than the number of blobs per block.
I like a limit of 1.
Okay.
Alex?
No. What? Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, it looks like there are plenty of open issues with blobs. So yeah, everyone keep thinking about it. Generally the feature and market is immature, so you know, we'll work out these kinks as time goes on. Is there anything else? We have a few minutes left on the call. I don't think there are any other agenda items for the day. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.